Hi everyone, welcome back to Ways of the World, a brief global history with sources as we continue our study on society and inequality in Eurasia and North Africa. And today our focus will be slavery, the case of the Roman Republic. So let's start with slavery and civilization. Slavery was quote unquote a social death. They had no rights or independent personal identity. Slavery was a long established tradition by the time of Hammurabi, around 1750 BCE. And almost all subsequent civilizations had some form of slavery, but it varied considerably over place and time. Within classical Greece and Rome, slave emancipation was common. Within the Aztec Empire, children of slaves were considered to be free, and the labor of slaves varied widely. But slavery was less common in China, maybe 1% of the population. Convicts and their families were the earliest slaves. Poor peasants sometimes sold their children into slavery. But in India is a little different. Criminals, debtors, war captives, these were the slaves. They did largely domestic tasks, and there were some protections under religion and the law, but society wasn't economically dependent on slavery. All right, the making of Roman slavery. Within the Mediterranean Western civilization, slavery played an immense role. The Greco-Roman world was a slave society as slave estates grew. 1/3 of the population of classical Athens was enslaved. Aristotle once said that some people are quote-unquote slaves by nature. And at the beginning of the Common Era, Italy's population was 33 to 40% slaves. It was the wealthy Romans owned hundreds or even thousands of slaves, while people of modest means often owned 1 or 2, maybe 3 slaves. So how people became slaves. There was a massive enslavement of war prisoners, piracy, long-distance trade for Black Sea, East African, and Northwest European slaves, natural reproduction, and even abandoned or exposed children. But slavery is not associated with a particular ethnic group. There's little serious social critique of slavery, even within Christianity. And slavery was deeply entrenched in Roman society. Slaves did all sorts of work except military service. They performed both highly prestigious and degraded tasks. Slaves had no legal rights, but owners were supposed to provide necessities. They could not marry legally. They did suffer physical and sexual abuse and sell to other owners who were also allowed. It did not legally own property. If a slave murdered his master, all of the victims' slaves were killed. Now, manumission was common. The Roman freedmen became citizens. Now, there are multiple different responses to slavery, including mass suicide. Quote-unquote weapons of the weak. This is theft, sabotage, faking illness, poor work, placing curses, etc., and even fleeing and murdering their owners. And there are several notable rebellions, but the most famous was led by Spartacus in 73 BCE. There's nothing on a similar scale that occurred in the West until the Haitian slave revolution in the 1790s. And Roman slave rebellions did not attempt to end slavery. Participants generally just wanted freedom for themselves. All right, this is a mosaic of Roman slavery. This Roman mosaic here from the 3rd century CE shows the slave Miro serving a drink to his master, Fructus. So what representations found in the mosaic can be used as evidence of class distinctions? We should note that there's a difference in what they're doing, in their actions. Miro labors while Fructus accepts the results of his labor. And dress. Miro has a short toga that covers little more than his torso, while Fructus has a larger part of his body covered. All right, the death of Spartacus from 71 BCE. Despite the prominence of slavery in ancient civilizations, large-scale slave revolts were rare. One of the most impressive began in the Roman Empire during the summer of 73 BCE, when around 70 slaves escaped from a gladiator school at Capua, about 125 miles south of Rome. They grabbed knives and skewers from the kitchen on their way out, and this small band of men, who had been trained to fight to the death for the entertainment of spectators, established a stronghold on nearby Mount Vesuvius and chose as their leader Spartacus. Now, the defeat of Roman forces sent to seize them encouraged other slaves and some freemen to join the rebellion. Their numbers eventually swelled to as many as 120,000 men, women, and children at the height of the uprising, and reflecting the larger number of slaves employed on the great estates of southern Italy. Now, Roman authorities became increasingly concerned when Spartacus and his followers began to manufacture their own weapons and then organize into a more coherent military force, which defeated, in turn, several hurriedly assembled Roman armies and plundered the rich farming region of Campania. The fortunes of the rebels peaked in 72 BCE when they briefly threatened Rome itself. The Greek historian Appian reported that Spartacus ordered the sacrifice of 300 Roman prisoners in honor of the slain rebel leader Crixus. When the revolt was finally suppressed, captured rebel slaves received similarly brutal treatment from the Roman authorities. Fearful for the safety of the capital, the Roman authorities acted decisively. They appointed Marcus Licinius Crassus, a rich and ambitious Roman aristocrat and military commander, to lead 8 Roman legions, totaling perhaps 40,000 troops, against Spartacus and the rebels. Crassus ordered the slave army in the far south of Italy, and Spartacus soon realized that his followers faced a fight to the death. For those who survived, a terrible vengeance followed as some 6,000 captured rebel slaves were nailed to crosses along the Appian Way between Capua, where the rebellion began, and Rome. These crucified prisoners spaced some 35 to 40 yards apart for over 100 miles, and that provided a clear warning to all others who contemplated rebellion. Now, Spartacus's revolt had little lasting effect on the society in which he lived, and no further large-scale revolts took place in the Roman Empire, and Rome continued its economic system based on slave labor. And that concludes our study of slavery, the case of the Roman Republic. See you guys next time.